Phase 3 starts to raise the bar in every respect. I think it's more fun, more rewarding, but also more challenging. Because up until this point, we've made fairly simplistic geometric modifications to our sphere to arrive at Phase 2. And it's starting to look human, but we still have a long way to go. And Phase 3 is a big leap towards a much more defined human face. We're going to stick to the geometric nature, but the modifications we're going to make are a little less systematic. Because let's face it, the human face is very complex, very weird shapes are happening all over the face. But still, we're sticking with a more formulaic approach, and you should be able to follow just fine. First thing we're going to do is sharpen the brow shelf. I'm going to do this with the Draw Sharp brush. And I am going to enable dynamic topology here as subdivide edges, because whenever I make hard edges, I want them to be maintained throughout the sculpture. I don't want them remeshing along the way at a lower resolution. And I'm using a 7 pixel detail size. However, despite all that, for whatever reason, the Draw Sharp brush does not modify the geometry. That's okay. The level of geometry here should be fine. If it's not, you'll see me do this a lot. I'll take the Simplify brush and simply stroke over that area, and that will update the geometry to whatever detail size we set here. All right, let's go back to the Draw Sharp, and at a fairly large brush but low strength, I'm going to start pushing out this shelf into a sharp edge. Also, keep in mind that I switched the default behavior of the brush to be push out instead of push in. Okay, with that established, let's go to our front orthographic view, enable our original yellow annotation, and let's define where the eyes are going to sit. So I'm actually going to make a new annotation layer because this is getting pretty confusing to look at, I'm sure. Let's switch to a light, bright pink color, grab our annotations, and the first thing I want to do is draw a little hash mark that's vertically aligned to the corners of our nose. So about right here and here. And next, I'm going to look at the space between this hash mark and the outside of the head, and then split that in half. Do the same thing to the other side. And essentially, we have subdivided the horizontal width of our head from the front angle into fifths. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Now, in the 2 and 4 slot, that's where our eyes are going to sit. So I'm going to fill in a little eye bulge with the fill brush. All right, the fill brush will take the valley that we currently have and simply fill it as if you would with water. All right, so if I focus on just the area in between those hash marks, it will build up a very nice eye shape. Now you can use the inflate brush to kind of bulge that out a little bit more, but really we don't want to bulge it out too much. Something like this. And keep in mind, it is an almond shape, of course. Let's turn off our annotation so we can see what that looks like. And yeah, now we've got some eyes, which completes the last, main facial feature. Now we're going to begin adding what I call key defining lines. All right, so we'll either be cutting a valley in or pushing an edge out to create distinct features of the face. And the first one is going to be the forehead. We're going to cut a line from where the top of the ear meets the head and cut it inward all the way across the forehead. And so to get an idea of where this will cross the forehead, it's going to be close to the hairline that we marked earlier. Not in the middle of the hair and the brow, but closer to the hair. And I'm going to use our Draw Sharp brush for this. With the fall off, sometimes I'll use sharper, the default, but for this one I'm going to use linear. So I'm going to hold Control and we're going to draw, lightly pressing on our brush to just subtly build up a valley that we're going to cut in here. All right, so even though it looks subtle from this angle, we've actually pushed the temporal line of the skull way in. So this harsh line is representative of the temporal line in the skull, this right here. And this valley that we're cutting starts to imply the dip that we see in the temple of your head. Also, you can see in the skull, the ridge as it crosses over the forehead. That is what we're focused on. However, we don't need to come in quite this much. So as part of the, ridge and valley cutting process, I'm going to pinch in the middle to define that more geometrically. Maybe switch over to the crease brush and let's see, make that plus by default. Cut in a little bit. All right, and so as we cut these ridges, or defining lines, we want to smooth and flatten the spaces around those lines to keep things geometric. The bulge that we have, that's not what we want. So we will switch over to the scrape brush to start flattening these. Either the scrape brush or the smooth brush. Both of them work well for this purpose. All right, just try and keep it more geometric. And we did cut in the temporal line too far, so I can use my grab brush and pull this back out. Again, smoothing the space in between, trying to keep it geometric at all times. The geometric part of this is important to simplify the complexity of the human head. And so even though this will actually be a lot of work for us to keep it geometric, we're basically hard surface sculpting, it is going to be worth it to better understand the shape of the head, and especially these defining lines. All right, so let's look from the side view and turn on our yellow original annotations. So we cut in that valley, but we push the forehead back a little too far. I'm going to push everything forward to come a little closer to that original line. And same thing with this inner circle. We want to bring our temporal line close to that, or closer to that. There we go, that looks better. Turn off that annotations layer. Make sure that our planes in between that defining line are smooth, or flat. All right, so that's the first defining line we're going to cut. The second one is going to be the zygomatic arch. So if we switch back over to the anatomic model, now we're going to be cutting in a line representative of the zygomatic process, also referred to as the zygomatic arch. And so this is going to be a horizontal line, starting at about the same place where the ear connects to the head, but we're not going to push in, we're going to push outward. So let's switch back to our draw sharp brush, and I'm not holding control, set to push out by default, and we're going to subtly push out a ridge. All right, so it looks like maybe the fall off, linear fall off is not going to be what I want. I'm going to switch over to sharp. All right, so start to define that. Don't push it too far. These are subtle. So I'm going to pinch this now to make it more hard-edged. There we go. That's representative of the zygomatic bone. And we're going to stop right at that diagonal triangle line that we made earlier. Okay, so we're going to stop it there and connect it in just a few minutes. But next we want to cut another defining line that's representative of two fat pads and where they meet. So back over to our anatomic model, let's turn on our fat pads. And we're talking about the medial cheek fat and the nasolabial fat. So this connection right here, we're going to draw a line representative of that. Once again, cutting into our mesh, not pushing out. So back to our draw sharp brush, and this is going to be a straight line, basically where the top of the nose meets the head, all the way down to the corner of the jaw. All right, and we're going to start holding control with a big brush with a fairly low strength, right about 0.3. And I'm going to hold control, starting out lightly, but pushing hardest right as we cross the ridge, and then lightly letting up as we get to the other corner. All right, so you should see the biggest divot happen around the ridge. All right, I think that's going to be pretty good. But as usual, we need to refine this line. Let's switch over to the pinch brush with the P hotkey, and let's pinch this all the way down. And you can see as it fades away towards the corner. And then either smooth or scrape brush in between our defining lines. And so this is where we're going to connect with another hard edge from where we left off in the zygomatic line. Then I'm going to push out slightly and we're going to connect to here. All right. And this is where we can use the scrape brush to make a pretty big difference in the planar geometry of this area. We're going to plane that smooth in between those two lines. So if I look at the profile, we don't want this kind of curving into a sharp valley. Again, we're trying to keep things much more planar. And so another part is bringing this in to make it flat. All right, so focusing on the defining lines, smoothing and or scraping in between. Let's pinch those ridges to make them nice and sharp. And this is a bit of a weird shape. The fact that we have an intersection of a valley and a ridge is definitely a little bit strange, but we can do that kind of thing whenever we sculpt. So just trying to straighten out the ridge. Keep it planar in the surrounding surfaces. Just holding shift to smooth this out. And I think we're at a pretty good spot. And here we've got a very definitive Y shape that's important for the human face. So if we turn on our annotate layer, we're talking about this Y shape right here. That is very important. And from the front, you can see how that relates to the rest of the head. Next, we can continue down into the chin. All right, so right now we've got a very flat muzzle. We're going to fix that, but start with the chin. Let's cut a very deep valley, essentially a half circle around where the chin is going to be. So in between the lip and the chin, let's start cutting in, holding control, and create a half circle valley. All right, and we can cut this one pretty deep. Seems I don't have enough geometry, so let's use that simplify brush again to update the geometry, and back to the draw sharp. All right, let's use pinch. Make this nice and tight. Smooth around the defining lines. And for this, we're actually going to smooth in another half circle, and it's going to produce a second defining line. Right there. Now, I think I made my half circle a little bit too wide, but this depends on the face. You know, some people have a wide chin, others have a thinner chin. I'm just going to go somewhere in between. And then I also want to connect the vertical ridge we've been working on into that second chin ridge. So with the draw sharp brush, let's just push this out, connect into the chin, and then I'm going to smooth all of this on the outside of the ridges. Maybe use the scrape brush to define this a little bit better. There we go. So we've kind of stopped the first ridge that we cut, and it flattens out once it crosses the vertical ridge. All right, but we run into a problem, and that's the fact that our mouth and muzzle is flat across. And that's not the case for the human face. In fact, I see this a lot with people starting to sculpt the human head, is they don't push the corners of the mouth backward inset into the face as much as they should. And so we're going to look from the side view and try to find a point of reference for how far back to bring them. Let's turn on our yellow original annotations. And for one, I can see that my mouth, the front of the mouth, has been pushed too far back itself. So I want to make it match with that original line. So I'm going to actually leave side view, make sure I grab the middle of the muzzle, middle of the lips, and bring it forward. And then I should be able to do that a little easier from the side. And now for the corner of the mouth, I'm going to use my pink annotation layer. Let's erase some of the other marks. Make this hash mark in here. Actually, this hash mark is kind of where I want to bring down a new line. Basically, I'm looking at in between these two yellow lines, split that in half, and then draw straight down. All right, so that line is where I want to pull the corner of the mouth to. And make sure that the ridge comes with it. We don't want a big dip in that ridge, so the whole ridge will stay straight as we bring the corner of the mouth backward. And also this line is representative of where the eye needs to be, so the whole eye kind of needs to come back a bit, about like that. All right, so now those are aligned much better. Still just perfecting the planar nature. Ooh, look at all our annotations. That's getting really confusing. All right, let's turn them off and then fix some of the wobbliness that we introduced. But most importantly, we've got a nice curvature to the mouth, though I still think the corner of the mouth can come back a little bit more, but we'll worry about that once we focus on the mouth specifically. For now, we're in the ballpark of where that needs to be. And this ridge is just a little too strong for me. So I'm just gonna smooth it out. You know, I don't want really any of the ridges to be more defined than the others. Can put a little too much emphasis on something that doesn't need the emphasis. All right. But now we've taken the bottom of that Y and also created a defining factor for the human face, and it curves into the head towards the chin. All right, that's looking pretty good. Though we have a curvature in the jaw, which I don't want. So let's make sure that that's a little more straight. Yeah. Probably the hardest part of all this is keeping everything very planar. That's tricky to do sculpting wise, but it's worth it for understanding the shape of the face. And so I do kind of have a curve here. You can see it from this angle, how the silhouette curves upward. I don't want that curve. I want it to be flat. So let's use our fill brush to just fill that space in. Fill is great for that kind of thing. Now, when I smooth, it's going to lose that curve. And again, all for the sake of remaining as planar as possible. Maybe cut this in a little bit more as well. You know, a really chiseled face is going to have some of these defining lines be more extreme, whereas a plumper face, these defining lines are not going to be as strong. But anyway, I can get lost a little bit in just keeping everything as planar as possible, but hopefully you're getting the idea of what we're after. And next, we're going to turn some attention to the nose, because the corners of the nostrils are kind of same problem with the mouth. It's left over from being flat, whereas it needs to be curved. So we should be able to solve that with the Draw Sharp brush if I just hold Control and start to push this inward to create a more defined side of the nose. We are going to keep the nose very simple geometry. We're not really going to modify that, but we are going to set it in the head a little more believably, and then start to smooth out the space around the nose. All right, I need more geometry here, so let's use the Simplify brush to update that geo. Use the Scrape and or Smooth brush. There we go. Did that? Oh, somehow I turned Dynamic Topology off. Let's turn that on. Update the geometry and try smoothing again. There we go, much better. All right, so we smooth all that out. And an optional thing I'll do here, you don't have to, but I just like it when the lips look a little more believable, is to define the lips a little bit better. We already have a ridge, but I'm going to, let's try moving the upper part of the ridge, because the lips, you know, vertically get thicker towards the middle. So if we pull this up, pull the lower ridge down, you know, by smoothing in between the defining lines, these shapes have started to form themselves. Maybe use pinch to define that bottom lip a little better, define the upper lip, even use Draw Sharp to push this upper lip out, and then smooth in between. All right, so we're starting to get a much more readable lip shape. And I don't want to spend too much time, but that does look a lot more human. Now, as far as the width of the mouth, let's double check that with our yellow annotations. And typically, the center of the eye, that vertical line down, is where the corners of the mouth need to be. Of course, this varies widely depending on the person, but generally speaking, this should come out a little bit more. It could come out, not that it should, but that starts to look a little more generic, actually, maybe even a little too wide. So maybe this line that I drew vertically is favoring the outside rather than being directly in the center of the eye. So anyway, in the ballpark, we're pretty close. Now, we are lacking geometric fidelity in the nose. It's just a little muddy compared to the planar quality of everything else. So let's just smooth this out, make our ridges a little more defined. Maybe pull the nose to be a little bit skinnier from the front. There we go. That starts to match the quality of everything else. Yeah, really one of the hardest things about this process is just keeping everything planar. Hard surface sculpting is an art in and of itself, but I really think you'll appreciate having the planes of the face, because now we're starting to get crucial milestones into what the human face looks like from different angles. For example, from the 3/4 view here, this type of shape, let's see, I'll make another annotation layer. Let's make it, blue is fine. But this silhouette right here is very human, and a lot of people mess that up. But if you follow this formula, you should be good. You should be really close to this. And I hope you agree that we are looking much more human and less of an Oscar statue now that we're at this point. However, there's a couple more things to change. I am feeling like maybe I pushed this ridge a little too far out on the side of the head. So let's bring that in. We can also use the draw sharp brush to cut in a valley here and connect to this ridge going up into the temporal line. So let's smooth that out, cut the ridge in. And what this will do is kind of create a zigzag in this ridge. All right, so where it was straight, now we've got a little back and then down. There we go. That feels a little better. And really the last thing I want to do for the head, I still need to venture into the neck. There's virtually nothing defined in the neck, which we will do in the next lesson. But I'm pretty happy with the face at this point, except for the back of the head. The front, the temporal line creates, if we look at the front orthographic view, the temporal line creates a more rectangular shape. However, that rectangular shape does not need to continue into the back of the head. We actually need to pull out the back to be more rounded. So with a big grab brush, I'm just simply pulling this out slightly so it becomes more rounded. And then from the front, we can also pull that out so that the silhouette overall becomes a more rounded head. I think I need to pull it back even more from the back angle. Look at it from the front. There we go. Much more believable, much more natural feeling. And yeah, this is where we're going to stop for the planar face. Next, we'll move into the neck.